today talking about the role of the U.S. corporate media as an arm of the U.S. military in hiding and covering up U.S. wars all over the world. And the wars are hidden in many, many different ways. Through funding that's secret and open, through not reporting U.S. NATO expansion and troop movement, through not mentioning the connection to U.S.-funded mercenaries, such as in Syria, through not mentioning the role of the U.S. Air Force, such as in the Saudi bombing of Yemen, through not mentioning the role of the U.S. Navy and the expansion to bases throughout the Pacific surrounding China. We're here today talking about the role of the U.S. corporate media, which exists in order to guarantee U.S. corporate profit. And the greatest source of corporate profit is U.S. wars, militarism, and the oil. This is a real power, the real source of profit behind U.S. banks, behind Wall Street. Yes. And it's money taken directly from what we need right here at home, stolen directly from schools. Today in the U.S., our schools rank 57th on a world scale, behind every other industrialized country. What does that mean for the future of our children? And yet, the U.S. ranks #1 in prison population, in the number of people in solitary confinement and facing torture, ranks #1 on a world scale. And of course, #1 in bases all over the world. When we talk about foreclosure, the number of people homeless and losing their homes, we want to talk about water shutoffs in Detroit and how that connects right away and in the most direct way to sending more troops again to Iraq. So why don't we know these things? Because the corporate media today is so powerful. Their role is to hide and distort all of this. And to rename troops, U.S. troops. They're no longer called U.S. troops. They're called peacekeepers and trainers and advisors. And U.S. mercenaries are no longer called mercenaries. They're called private contractors. U.S. bases are no longer called bases. All the new bases in Iraq they're referring to as lily pads, as if they were talking about flowers. This is the role of the corporate media today, to take every word, U.S. military maneuvers around the world, threats on country after country are called war games, as if this is for children. As nuclear aircraft carriers stop just offshore. So we want to talk about the right of countries to develop their own economy, free and independent of Wall Street and corporate domination.
It's almost the same reason for any of these wars or demonizations of countries around the world, whether it be Syria or Russia or North Korea or Iraq before the U.S. invasion. They talk about a so-called dictator. They talk about crimes against humanity. But we can look at when the United States and the West goes in to so-called help these countries. When the United States goes in to so-called help these countries, what happens? There's the United States commits mass murders of civilians. Let's look at Iraq now, the city of Fallujah, where there are more children born with deformities than in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined because of the use by the United States government of chemical weapons. This is a most disgusting crime committed by the government of the United States, paid for by our tax dollars.
You listen to CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, you would think that the threats to peace in the world are coming from Russia, they're coming from China, they're coming from Iran, they're coming from Syria. You would not know that U.S. bombs are raining now, down now, on the country of Yemen, and thousands have died. You would not know that the city of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, for the first time in 70 years since World War II, is being hit with incendiary shells fired by men who are the direct descendants of the Nazis who fought for Hitler. And that the United States government is arming them and funding them to create a pretext to expand NATO.
So where is the repression really coming from? It's coming from those that the U.S. is funding. It's coming from those that the U.S. is supporting. That's why it's so very important that we're out here today talking to people about the truth. And that someone in Washington, Representative John Conyers, a civil rights veteran, has finally, someone in Washington has finally stood up in Congress and called out the fascist character of the regime in Ukraine with an amendment that was passed by the House a couple days ago. And we need to take advantage of that and to help raise the awareness in this country of the reality of what's going on. Because a black man involved in the civil rights struggle in the South in the 1960s certainly knows a fascist when he sees one. It's now punishable by an 8 to 15 year sentence if you're caught carrying a flag of victory or a Soviet medal or any other anti-fascist symbol. Now, if you hear them talk on CNN about the breakaway areas of eastern Ukraine, the independent Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, you would think they were a totalitarian nightmare. But in fact, at the very same time that fascists were attacking veterans on the streets of Ukraine, an unprecedented international conference of leftists, anti-imperialists, and anti-fascists was being held in Lugansk, hosted by one of the premier anti-fascist leaders in Donbass, Commander Alexei Moskovoy of the Ghost Brigade. And this brought together people, activists from more than a dozen countries across Europe and Latin America, and laid a really important basis for building international solidarity with the struggle in Donbass and with the struggle of anti-fascists throughout Ukraine. Just a few days after that conference, Commander Moskovoy was assassinated along with 4 of his associates and 2 civilians. Probably not a coincidence.
After the end of the Second World War, there were Nuremberg trials where German war criminals were tried and basically hanged, many of them. Among them, there was Goebbels and other war propaganda people. Basically, the media that spreads the war and supports the war is guilty of war crimes. And I want to say that CNN is guilty of war crimes.
The corporate media's silence about the shelling of residential areas and killings of civilians, war crimes by any standards. Let's not be deceived by the official propaganda. The aggression against civilians in the eastern Ukraine goes on. What's more disturbing is that now it is American troops who train Kiev military to kill civilians. American troops in Ukraine. It is an all too familiar scenario. Are we about to have another Iraq or Syria in the Eastern Europe? Say no to war. Stop American warmongering policies all around the world.
We attempted to go to Yemen. They aren't covering it. They're not giving it any coverage. They're ignoring it. But right now, every day, every moment, the Saudis are bombing Yemen. They're bombing, they're attacking people in Yemen. The official death count is at least 4,000 people, probably more than that. People have died. So I was on a ship, I was on the Iran Shahid, which is a ship that went to Yemen to attempt to deliver humanitarian aid. We had 2,500 tons of humanitarian aid with the Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We departed, and we were unable to complete our mission. We were unable to succeed because of U.S.-backed Saudi terrorism. The day we were scheduled to arrive, they bombed the port of Hodeidah 8 times in a single day. 8 times to prevent us from delivering medical aid. And we were unable to complete our mission. We were forced to go to Djibouti. And blocking humanitarian aid is a crime against humanity. It is illegal to block humanitarian aid. And we were completely open to having the ship inspected by the United Nations, by the Red Cross. This was a purely humanitarian mission. There was nothing military about it. And they still blocked the boat. They still bombed and destroyed the port of Hodeidah. And if you want to know why the Saudis are bombing Yemen right now, you should really understand it's to keep Yemen poor. That's what it's about. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's the poorest country in the Middle East. But it shouldn't be poor because it has huge untapped oil resources. Huge untapped oil resources. It's a very wealthy country. But the Saudis don't want that oil on the market. The Saudis don't want the Yemenis to take control of their resources and do what Venezuela has done, what Iran has done, and start developing their own economy. So now the Yemeni people, they've overthrown a dictator. The previous president, Mansour Hadi, was a dictator. The only candidate on the ballot. No other candidates were allowed on the ballot. A staged election. And so the people of Yemen have risen up. And it's not a Sunni versus Shia war. That's kind of a myth that these guys, when they feel like talking about it, which is very rarely, occasionally they'll try to talk about it and they'll say, oh, it's a Sunni versus Shia war. Well, that's not the case. At the center of the coalition that's fighting against the Saudis is something called Ansar Allah, which is a Shia organization. But they're just one organization in a broad coalition of forces in the country. There are Marxists in a coalition with them, there are secular forces, there are Sunnis, there are people of all different religions that are aligned with Ansar Allah to fight for the independence of Yemen. And it's not a Sunni versus Shia war. The reason that the Shias are at the center of it is because in Yemen, just like in all Saudi-aligned societies, Shias face extreme discrimination. If you're a Shia Muslim, you're not allowed to attend school. You're forced to become, a manual laborer. You're not allowed to work in any high-paying job. They're not allowed to have their own schools. So they face discrimination. If they even try to have religious services, regular religious services, the government will arrest them and attack them. So in response to that, they kind of picked up a gun and they've revolted. And the most oppressed people in Yemen, the Shias, are at the center of a coalition. And it kind of reminds you about the history of the black liberation struggle in the U.S. How the black people in the U.S. have been so oppressed and so discriminated against. But when they rise up, it brings the rest of society forward, right? Well, that's what's happening in Yemen right now. The Shias are rising up, and they're bringing forward all kinds of people. This is not a Sunni versus Shia war. And since the Saudis have started bombing, Yemeni society has almost become completely united against the attack. Before, there were some people who didn't agree with Ansar Allah, or they didn't agree with that. Now that they're under attack, they're almost completely united. There's over 342,000 people in the People's Militia. I mean, it's an armed struggle. The whole country is rising up. They have popular committees that are forming all throughout the country, talking about what kind of society they want to have. Yemen is moving in a very good direction, and the Saudis' only response to it is bombing and death.
CNN came out and actually put up barricades around our demonstration. And this is a media corporation who's acting like the New York City Police Department, who actually say they're going to put us in cages to deny us from speaking our democratic right, to deny us from speaking against attack against the people of Yemen, the people of Yugoslavia, Haiti. Let's talk about Libya, one of the countries who had one of the most richest educational and economic and people sharing power in all of Africa, who now has been totally destroyed. CNN showed that coverage about that Libya had weapons similar to that of Iraq, a weapon of mass destruction, that Libya was supporting fascists and so on and so on. And now we see one of the most biggest countries that gave the most help to all of Africa, and economic resource and telecommunication and students and science
has been totally destroyed. Totally destroyed. These are some of the development that we see that's happening. I remember the attack that happened in Staten Island of Eric Garner. And Ramsey Oda was a teenage youth who actually videoed the chokehold of Eric Garner. Well, that didn't get covered like we see the wars and attacks that happened with CNN. They actually attacked Oda, and he wound up going to jail in Rikers Island for videoing an attack by the New York City Police Department.
We train terrorists that they are called moderate Syrian opposition, but we train them to be militarily fit to go and fight the Syrian army and to kill Syrian people. We all should stand together and say this is wrong. It's wrong to spend our tax dollars on terrorism. It's wrong to spend tax dollars on ISIS and our president likes to call it ISIL. What's the point? How can we get any benefit in making a terrorist group alive and powerful in that region? Do we think we are safe if ISIS is powerful? What is the power that we're going to get if the Syrian army and the Syrian people are killed?
Syrian people have been suffering. This is the 5th year, but we never lost hope, and we will never lose hope. We lost our families. Every day we lose beautiful young men fighting against terrorism. Many nationalities fighting in our country, Syria. They destroy everything that we have. They destroy our streets, our buildings. They want to destroy anything named heritage. But the Syrian people, the Syrian government are fighting hand to hand. The Syrian people, our president, Bashar al-Assad, that we love him. We love you. And we have big hope that you are going to move Syria to the shore.
We have money for wars all over the world, but here, the war at home continues. The question of Black Lives Matter, Latin Lives Matter, All Lives Matter is a question of people being attacked and losing their social needs, losing their education, losing their jobs, losing their houses from the 2008 so-called housing bubble, and being forced into the street. Is this not a war at home? This company here is using it for super exploitation. They are the advertisers of Wall Street. The stocks have changed. This is what we have up here. They are hand in hand with the U.S. military government. When a bomb is dropped in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, they are responsible because they tell lies. So the people that's being killed there in these countries, they are being killed and with the collaboration of a lying media out of that building right here, CNN. You should know who they are and who they represent. But we have a story to tell. We have papers going, we have leaflets going, we have signs here, and we are workers. I'm a home care provider workers. We have technician workers. We have media workers. We have factory workers. We have hospital workers. And we are in solidarity with the workers in Yemen, and the workers all over the world, and the workers in Venezuela that represent the means of social need and social change and not for war and corruption.